And all of a sudden there were these two beings that were in the room, and they were probably what most people are referring to when they talk about like light beings or energy beings. A really interesting group of cases of reptilians, like during the Vietnam War, and like Vietnam vets like seeing reptilians. And there does seem to be this kind of singularity approaching, and some people speculate like, maybe they have to get some disclosure out because the AI is going to figure it out anyway.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of the UAP sessions. I'm your host, Scott Murtha, and today I'm joined by a very special guest, experiencer, researcher, and filmmaker, J. Christopher King. Jay has had ongoing experiences with the UFO phenomenon ever since he was a child, including experiences with non-human intelligence. He is the creator of the Experiencer Group, and right now he is creating a show with Kelly Chase, which is called Cosmosis, UFOs and a New Reality, which can be found on Tubi. So join me as I speak with Jay about UFOs, non-human intelligence, and the possibility of UFO disclosure.
Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the UAP sessions. I am here with my special guest, J. Christopher King. Jay, thank you so much for taking time to come on the show.
Well, thanks, Scott. It's great to be here.
I really appreciate you taking the time, and I know you've got a lot going on. You're really busy. You've got your show that you're doing right now, Cosmosis, which is fantastic, by the way. It's amazing. I do want to give you your flowers on that because you're doing tremendous work. The show, the way it's put together, is fantastic. And a lot of your other work is great too, which I do want to get into. But you are an experiencer. You are a filmmaker. You would do a lot of stuff with people who've had experiences. You have the Experiencer Group. So I do want to talk about all that stuff today. If you don't mind, if we can start off, I know you kind of got involved in this because of your experience that you've had as a child, correct?
That's right.
Do you mind telling us that story?
Sure. Yeah, it can. I've had kind of a lifetime experiences. There's definitely some focus points that are in early childhood and then in my late teens, early 20s. But kind of what happened early on, the first experience that I can remember was when I was about 3-4 years old. I lived in Fort Wayne, Indiana, and I was in my my bedroom. I was pushing like a bin of toys across the floor. I remember. It's funny how like when some of your earliest childhood memories are often like the uh-oh moments, like when you touch something that's hot, or you got bit by a pet or something like that, or you fell out of a tree.
Right.
I'm mentioning those three because those are three of my other like early childhood experiences kind of screwing up, right? But there's usually like motion or like a feeling attached to it, right? And for whatever reason, like I remember kind of pushing the bin of toys across the floor as being kind of like the onset of this memory. And all of a sudden there were these two beings that were in the room, and they were probably what most people are referring to when they talk about like light beings or energy beings. They both looked like one looked a little bit more, or it didn't look more, it just felt like it was more male, and the other felt like it was more female. They were really skinny, like they almost looked like a representation of a person more than a person, almost as if this kind of energy had coalesced itself into the form of a person that was probably not, maybe looking back on it, maybe not its native form, if that makes sense.
Right.
So it's kind of more of a symbol in some ways. It felt more like a symbol. But they were occupying three-dimensional space, in front of me. And the color was kind of like a flame, like a whitish yellow, semi-translucent. And it just felt like I was kind of in this womb, Like it felt like a telepathic connection was pretty immediate, and um, I was really surprised. I just kind of stood up from my little bin of toys, and I I was just listening, and um, they basically were telepathically communicating. Um, it wasn't. It's hard to describe. Like different, there are a lot of different kinds of clairaudience and different kind of telepathic messaging that people report with
Right.
different NHI or different discarnate beings, etc. And it seems like everybody has their own way of speaking, and it's interesting because in a lot of those cases there seems to be a thing where the beings are scanning your mind to figure out like what would be a relatable vocabulary for you. It's very rare. It does happen that people will hear a word or a phrase that they don't know when they're in contact like that, but usually it's a very specific phrase that is kind of there to like open up a whole line of inquiry. Like it's like a word that you take and it's meant to inspire you or something like that. But for the most part, I mean, in any situation like this, if you look at case history across the board, people are generally dealing with a situation where they feel like their mind's getting scanned and they feel like their words are getting used, which is interesting. So anyway, these beings, there's a unified messaging, even though there were these two beings. So it wasn't as if one was speaking and one was listening to me. It felt like this kind of like unified telepathic vibe in my general direction, right?
Okay, right.
Yeah.
That's
Okay.
wild.
So, yeah. So they're like, we know you, or like we've known you, was what kind of came out. We're visiting you now because we won't be able to visit you later. And, and, and they communicated this just kind of like overpowering sense of like love towards me. And it seemed like just kind of like this reassuring vibe that they were trying to put off. But essentially, like, we're seeing you now because we won't be able to see you. We've known you. Gave me this big kind of like overpowering positivity blast, and then they disappeared.
Wow.
Trying to think if I can remember if there are any other details I'm missing out on that. But so it's interesting, right? So then after that, I was like, what the heck was that? And I ran to the kitchen, and my mom was at like the breakfast table, like kind of off the kitchen. And I was like, Mom, like there's these things, they were in my bedroom. And she was like, don't worry about that. Those are called imaginary friends, and that's totally okay. Like you're at the age where people have imaginary friends, and that's fine. And it felt good that she was trying to reassure me, and at the same time, like I had a sense then, oh, that was the one other thing that they said to me. Okay, so we've known you. We're coming now because we can't later for some reason. Big love blast, and you'll remember this. You'll remember this. And sure enough, like it's one of my earliest memories. I remember it very viscerally, and it's still with me to this day, right? And so I talked to Mom, and she's like, yeah, don't worry about it. It's imaginary friends. It's fine. And I recognized that there was kind of like this schism, right? Because it felt like a very real experience. It didn't, like, I was 3-4 years old. I was very well versed in using my imagination at that point, right? As any kids are.
Yeah.
And this wasn't that, not in any kind of conventional sense of that. And so I recognized that she was being caring towards me, and then I also realized that there's something else going on. So a couple years later, flash forward, and I lived in a haunted, like a house that, at least in the neighborhood, was considered to be haunted. I didn't know that as we moved in. I was 6 years old, and um, there was poltergeist activity in the home and like weird shadows. And my mom, many years later, reported like that. Say when she like would reach for a set of keys on the kitchen counter, they'd kind of jump. Like there was
Right.
kind of like weird, playful poltergeist energy where she'd reach for the keys and they would just like shoot across the counter, or like kind of
Oh my
fly
gosh.
as if somebody threw them. And like the stove would be turned on, and the stove door and like the oven door would be open. I remember like doors opening and closing,
Oh wow.
things
So
like
you saw
that.
all that too.
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah, and it was interesting because like, I mean, there are a lot of people that live in homes like that, and they don't often talk about it. And you know, I think that it's it was interesting because like there are kids in the neighborhood that like knew about this, and like within the neighborhood there were kids that were like, can we go play hide and go seek at your house, because they knew that it was a spooky old house, right? And that was, and I thought that was interesting, and at the same time that wasn't really the vibe. And I wasn't really allowed to have a slew of kids over.
Right.
so so that wasn't happening.
Right.
But I recognized at that point that like there's a fundamental reality to this stuff. And by that point I'd also seen, TV shows, but they were always kind of like, at that point I was only a connoisseur of kids shows, really, you know.
Right.
And so I hadn't really seen any kind of like realistic depiction. This is the 80s, right? And so like
Right.
I hadn't seen any kind of like realistic depiction of like what a haunting would look like or anything like that. And my only frame of reference was like like Halloween, and like, a sheet with two holes in it, or like Scooby Doo,
Scooby Doo.
or
Yeah.
stuff
Right.
like that,
Exactly.
right? So I recognized that there was something really strange going on, and that's what people associated with like spookiness and Halloween and that kind of energy. But that like the way that it actually felt in that house was very different than how it kind of got dressed up on TV or around the holidays and stuff like that, right?
Right.
And so it kind of like further cemented to me as a kid that there's this kind of allure for some people, but like that the reality was really different than what a lot of people might have thought it looked like, or what it felt like.
Right.
Yeah, and so those are a few early experiences, and then I had other experiences later on that were kind of more associated with NHI and UFOs and things like that,
Right.
right? And it kind of got more thoroughly in that space. And it's interesting because it's like, it's strange, if somebody sees an orb in the woods, right, then it's like a earth spirit, or it's like, earth lights, or it's fairies or something like that, right? And if they see an orb in the sky and they're on the highway, then it's UFO. And if they see an orb in a house, then it's a ghost.
Right.
Right.
That's true. That's true. That's fantastic. Yes. That's very true.
So like, who's to say, in some ways, like, I don't know what to make of those light beings, and like I don't know exactly know what to make of those like shadowy beings either. And I don't know what to make of the grays, and they seem like they're distinct. They seem like they're their
Right.
own things, right? And at the same time, we make these kind of arbitrary distinctions, like
That's true.
based on where something is, or what the vibe of something feels like. But we don't really know, right?
Exactly.
And so I think, given some of those early experiences, that was very formative for me, and it really kind of set me up for a lifetime of experiences and a lifetime of examining what this really is and exploring that with other people, et cetera, et cetera. So
yeah, that's amazing. And with the hauntings, and do you feel like there's some type of connection between the two phenomena? Because a lot of people say that, like, go look for like a unifying theory of all these paranormal or supernatural type of things. And if you look at like what's it called, Skinwalker Ranch, right? So Skinwalker Ranch, there's a lot of UFO stories there. There's a lot of poltergeist activity. There's a lot of like cryptozoological things going on there. Do you feel like there could be some type of connection between all these phenomena, or do you think these are all completely separate?
Yeah, I mean, I do think that it's very possible that there's some kind of a connection between all these phenomena, at the very least, in terms of that many of them kind of live on our periphery, and they may even natively live outside of our native sense perception, and some of them may deliberately evade our sense perception. And it's even possible that evolutionarily, from an evolutionary perspective, we've developed to ignore them or not see them, some of them anyway, for the purposes of just like getting through our day.
Wow.
Because could you imagine if all you saw were like ghosts all day too? Like, like it could make it like challenging just to get in and out of the shower.
Exactly.
You know what I mean?
That's a really good point. That's really interesting.
Yeah. So I think that there's, at the very least, I think that there's probably a connection with a lot of this phenomena where certain people are maybe more likely to see it because of the range of their perception, like some people can hear a dog whistle, some people can't, some people have a more broad sense of smell or taste than other people do,
Right.
And different animals around us, bats, echolocation, there's all these, there's everything from what we see around us and what we know from other animals around us. We know that our senses are limited, and we depend on machines, for example, and cameras and things, IR and all that to expand our sense perception. And it's through some of those mechanisms, like infrared, for example, that for some of the kind of military UAP videos, et cetera, have been able to capture some of this stuff, right? Or sonar hits for some of the USOs, right? So we kind of know, or we can infer that a lot of this stuff is hanging out at the border of our perception. And so does that kind of link all of this phenomena in a native way, or does it link the phenomena merely by the strategies that they employ, or the kind of like native ecology that they live in? You know what I mean? Because it's also possible that we're on FM and everybody else is on AM. You know what I mean? It's like the car stereo.
Right.
Or more likely, when we talk about matter in the universe, like there's much more dark matter and more plasma than there is physical matter like us. So if you think about it that way, it's much more probable that they're actually FM and we're AM.
We're AM. Exactly.
We're like the province of like talk radio and a couple country radio stations and stuff, and that's about it. Everybody else gets Fleetwood Mac,
right? That's a really good analogy to make. It's crazy because we know so little about our universe. There's so much out there we just don't understand. And with all your experience that you've had, you started to you eventually came on to form a group, the Experiencer group. Can you tell us how that like unfolded for you?
Sure. So the Experiencer group, it's a private member site. It's pay what you wish online, dedicated to support curiosity and community for those who have lived through anomalous events of any and all kinds. So that could be UAP experience, hauntings, ghosts, precognition, cryptids, OBEs, psi phenomena, remote viewing. It really runs the gamut. Near-death experience. There's folks that have experienced any or all of those things and more within the community. We started it. A guy named Stuart Davis and Kirsten Blackburn started it back in 2020. What happened was in the early days of the pandemic, Kirsten and I were already working behind the scenes, kind of managing the day-to-day for Richard Dolan's member site,
Awesome.
the UFO historian. Yeah. And so it was us and Richard's wife, Tracy, and Bob McGuire, actually, that were
cool.
like hanging out doing that behind the scenes. And Kirsten and I recognized that there's a lot of mail coming in. And like Kirsten and I were like, part of our gig was that we were kind of like goalies for Richard's email. And so, or a lot of the communication that would come in, and it'd be like, what is Richard? Richard needs to protect a lot of his time for writing and podcasting, and he was doing more podcasting then than he is now. But he was still doing a lot of writing like he is now. And it was like, okay, Richard gets hundreds of emails a day. Like he can't read everything, much less respond to stuff. And so we would kind of sift there and stuff would go into different baskets, between Kirsten and I and Tracy, and we would kind of reply for him, or hit ignore or send it over to him depending on what was going on. And we recognized that there's just a lot of messaging that was from experiencers that just wanted to be heard. They just wanted to tell their story. They didn't feel like they had any outlet for this. And I recognized, I had a lot of empathy for that because I felt like I'd been in the same place, or I'd been in a similar place. And so I proposed with Kirsten, starting some Zoom kind of meetups for experiencers to be able to talk to each other. And at the same time, I was also in a group with Dr. Sean Esbjorn Hargens. I don't know if you know who he is. He's a dean of a noetic sciences program out at California Institute of Holistic Studies. CIHS, I think it is.
Okay.
And so, he actually has one of the first doctorate programs in the country where you can study ufology, which is wild.
Oh, wow. That's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. He's a great guy. And so, so I was in a program with Sean. He had these yearly classes going on at the time. And at the same time, I was working with Richard. And on both sides, there were a lot of experiencers that wanted to talk to each other. And so the pandemic happened, that shutdown happened. And right as that was happening, it's kind of like Zoom was taking off. And I started running these member meetups and these experiencer meetups online, sometimes with Kirsten and sometimes by myself. And in the very first one, this guy, Stuart Davis, who at the time was doing a podcast called Aliens and Artists, joined in. He had a lot of wild experiences himself. And we quickly realized, like by the end of that year, that there needed to be a place just for experiencers. Because by that point, there's this wild network of 5, 6, 7. Every time like I opened a new meeting group for experiencers, like the whole thing would fill up and there'd be like 35, 50 people in the room, and these meetings would go on for hours. And and it would fill, and then the demand would increase, and it was just like, okay, well, what are we going to do about this? And so by the end of that year and going into 2021, I figured out how to start a member site, partially informed by the work I'd done with Richard, and partly what I'd kind of picked up from other people, and started the Experiencer Group site. And since then, so it's been about 6 years now since those member meetups started, and a lot of the member meetups on there are support group meetups, and I lead a lot of those. Then there's an art club and a book club and like a women's meetup group and all sorts of, and like AMAs with guests that come in, and yeah, it's a lot of fun. It's great. And there's also like a kind of a like a timeline side that looks a lot like normal social media, so people can post and direct message each other and things like that. But since it's begun, like a lot of the juice and a lot of the center point is around people meeting up like we're meeting up right now, but via Zoom and having conversations that way. So yeah, I enjoy that work a lot. It's a lot about people comparing notes and just trying to figure stuff out, and it's interesting because you'll see these connections develop, and you'll see people put things together where somebody has like 3 puzzle pieces and another person has another 4 puzzle pieces, and then there'll be these like epiphany moments between folks that I see time and time again, where it's like if they hadn't come into that space and they hadn't talked to each other, it's like those puzzle pieces may never have fit together. And sometimes it almost feels like people are like, this was bound to happen or something like that. And I'm like, I don't know. Was it? It's mind bending, but it's a lot of fun. Yeah. Yeah.
I love that you're doing that. Yeah. I absolutely love that you're doing that. I mean, like we talked a little bit right before we started recording, it could be traumatic having these type of experiences. So giving
for sure
people a place where they can go and freely talk about their experiences and not have to worry about being judged. And because you know how it is with people in our society, when you have some type of experience, you're looked at as like you're crazy. And
absolutely,
for people to have that safe place to go that you help create, I mean, I think that's fantastic. Like, I love that you're doing that.
Thanks, man. Yeah, can I say one more thing about that along the lines
absolutely
of like stigma and stuff? Yeah, I appreciate that you brought that up. It's interesting because there are types of anomalous experience or kind of paranormal experience, however you want to frame it, that are more common, right? For example, like precognitive dreams or precognition in general. Like that seems far more common than UAP experience or seeing ghosts and things like that. In almost any family group, there's one or two, there's somebody that's like, oh, they saw, grandma getting in the accident before it happened, or this, that, or the other thing. And it's interesting because it's like, for some reason because of stigma, because of the way that we share stories, whatever it may be in Western society, like it seems more acceptable for like somebody in a family group. It's like, oh, that's Uncle Steve. He sees the future. Like that's like that's more normal. And it's like, oh, it's he had a precognitive dream. You know what I mean? Like, deja vu, whatever. But like seeing a UFO is impossible, even though we all see just like hundreds of suns and other solar systems in the night sky every night, right?
Exactly.
So it's strange to see how that develops, and it's absolutely true that there are kinds of anomalous experiences, for example, abduction experiences and things like that, that a lot of people just have very little awareness of. They have very little kind of space for. And, even there's a lot of debate even within the experiencer community, because it seems like there was a real high point of abduction phenomena in like the 80s and 90s. And, starting in kind of like the early 60s, and there are certainly, reports, there are the airship cases in the 1880s and 1890s. There are old cases like from ancient history that are collected by Jacques Vallée and people like Chris Auerbach, and like Wonders in the Sky and things like that, going back to like, the Romans, like Roman history, like people would see like flaming shields, like, Christopher Columbus, there's a UFO sighting on Columbus's ship. There's a lot going back, but when we're talking about beings, we have these stories through myth, and then we have this other kind of recent high point in terms of like interpersonal situations, right? And
Right.
I think, partially because there's this kind of a couple generations where that happened more, even though it was very taboo to talk about it. And then it kind of bubbled up into the public consciousness in the 90s. It seems that a lot of those cases have leveled off. And people speculate why that happened. Why were they? It seemed like they were doing all these genetic programs. It seemed like they were doing this, that, or the other thing. Why'd they cut that out?
Right.
What happened? And you know, and I don't have an answer for that. You know what I mean? But I do think that it's really important, even though it can be triggering, it can be challenging, to even just address, even for other experiencers. It's important to for people to be able to talk about that stuff, because so much of it is so kind of like brain breaking in terms of even just seeing like wildly advanced technology can be really hard for people to deal with, on top of all the other things that are involved. So yeah, I think it's really important for us to have that community and for it to be kind of all over the map with regard to the kinds of topics and the kinds of modalities of experience that we're dealing with.
Yeah, I mean, that's fantastic. And you're working on Cosmosis with Kelly Chase.
That's right.
Tell me your vision for Cosmosis. Like, what is your goal with creating this show?
Okay,
it's really well done, by the way. You've done phenomenal with it.
Oh, I appreciate that. Yeah, I mean, because Cosmosis, UFOs and NHI, season 1, it premiered on Prime Video and on Apple TV, kind of like New Year's going into 2025. It just showed up on Tubi for free, ad supported for free, in a bunch of countries last week, I think, or about 10 days ago. And I'm really psyched about that. I'm really glad that it's out there for folks. Started season 1 in working on season 1 in 2023. Season 1 took about 16 months or so of work, partially because it was just a very small crew. I have a lot of experience in TV production. I went to art school and then film school, and out here in the New York area. I live in New Jersey, and now I live in New Jersey. Back in those days, I was mainly living in Brooklyn, and I was mainly working for shows on kind of in the Discovery Channel network.
Right.
So that'd be Discovery, Animal Planet, TLC,
right?
Like channels like that. I was doing a lot of work for, and I enjoyed it. I was actually, since I kind of came out of film school and then I had to get a job and I had to find my way in the world. Initially, I was pretty embarrassed about it. I was like, oh man, like I'm on a cooking show right now, and like, or I'm on this show right now and I'm doing this. But like, I really enjoy, like looking back on it, it was so formative as well. And like, I couldn't be doing Cosmosis now if I hadn't, like produced like, I don't know, 98 episodes of Cake Boss,
Right.
like back in the day,
right.
for example, like, and Dual Survival and other stuff like that.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So and like, there's a lot of fun stories there, I mean, because so like I kind of came into TV in kind of like the heyday of reality TV, and like there are a lot of like hellacious, like wild, like what the heck was that experiences within the realm of reality. And then I kind of wandered more into like nonfiction kind of travel shows and sort of the survival shows and things like that, and that was really fun. And Yeah, I've enjoyed that. So anyway, like I there was a point in 2023 where I'd been doing these conferences out in New
Hmm.
York, um, that uh, starting in 2022, at the beginning of 2022, that I organized with James Ian Doley, and then Leslie Kane got a little bit involved with that too, and um, and through that I met Kelly Chase,
Okay.
and I met so many other people. I mean, just in that first year of conferences, I had like Gary Nolan out, and Ralph Blumenthal, and Leslie Kane, and Christopher Mellon, and Mitch Horowitz, and uh, God, so many other people. It's in the Whitley, Jeff Kripal, so many folks, and it created this kind of foundation of folks that I kind of knew better. Like some of those
Right.
people I'd known for a few years through the Experiencer group, or through going to other conferences, going to like the Archives of the Impossible, things like that.
Mhm.
Um, but doing those conferences really kind of, it created this wild social network that had developed, and all of a sudden, I was talking to people like that more regularly, and then I recognized that a lot of these TV shows, or these documentaries, a lot of the TV shows especially kind of only go up to a certain point,
Right.
that where, Ancient Aliens and stuff like that, they either go up to a certain point and are super safe, where they like end a whole season and they're like, maybe there's aliens, or it'll
Right.
do it the other way, and it'll be like Gaia TV or something like that, and they'll
Right.
be like, actually everything's aliens. You know what I mean?
Right.
From the pyramids to this to that, it's like
Exactly.
we were probably created by in this and that and the other,
Right.
and like not only probably, we definitely were, and
Yeah.
like I recognized that there wasn't really a good middle ground, where I was just like, can't we just do something where we can kind of rip the band-aid off and say like, yeah, like there's enough evidence, like let's just start it with like we're assuming
Right.
that there's a fundamental reality here, and then let's go be able to dive into the deeper questions, but try to do it in a really relatively responsible way. Try to
Right.
do it in a way that took the history into account. And it could take the history of like crash retrievals, and it could take the history of like, according to like John Mack and Bud Hopkins,
Hmm.
and like Coral Lorenzen and Leonard Stringfield and Donald Kehoe and folks like that into account. So we wouldn't have to like, because it seemed like some of these safe shows were kind of like starting with 2017, right?
Hmm.
And we even did that to a degree, like for framing, but then we kind of dove back into
Right.
the earlier cases, and we just recognized that like there needs to be more, there needed to be more that didn't do like a hard reboot on all of that history and all of that lore that had developed, but there's a way to do it in a more grounded way that wasn't just going full, Eric von Daniken about everything.
Right.
Um, and it's not that would mean that would be like everybody's thing. I think that Cosmosis, UFOs and the New Reality, it's a little bit like licorice. It's like for those people that like licorice, they're gonna really like this licorice,
Right.
and other people, they're gonna
Right.
they're gonna want another show. But we've been really happy with the response, and I think that it's provided kind of a middle path, that is forward thinking, and I'm happy this year to be working on season 2,
That's
and a
awesome.
lot of my efforts this year are going to be like moving towards season 2, and it's already been fun. We've already shot a couple episodes for it, and there's going to be more episodes. There's going to be more travel involved with it, and I don't want to do too many spoilers about it, but I'm
Right.
really excited about season 2. So
That's awesome. I'm excited
it's
for it too, man.
thanks, man.
That's
It's really
awesome.
fun.
Congrats.
It's really fun to be able to bring so many of my experiences together. Like, I mean, just and like my skill set, and it feels very fulfilling. Like I love doing that work. It makes me feel good, and it could be stressful, and it can feel like like depending when you're traveling with this stuff, it's kind of like doing an army operation. It's kind of like a clown car. It's kind of like there's like there's like a hurry up and wait element,
Right.
but like luckily like I'm used to all of these things, and given enough time, we can do it. So yeah, thanks, man. I
That
appreciate
is
that.
awesome, man. That is really
Yeah.
cool. Shifting gears a little bit here, you talk a little bit about this. I think you talked about this in Cosmosis too. Theories of NHI and their origins. And I know that, there's a lot of, no one can know for certain, but there's a lot of talk of like obviously extraterrestrial, which seems to be kind of like the original theory. Everything is coming from another planet. There is also interdimensional talk. There's also talk about ultraterrestrials. And I know there's some members of government who believe it's demonic by nature. Based on your experiences and your research and things you've heard from other people and, with their experience and through the experiencer group, what is kind of your take on the origin of NHI? What do you think we're looking at here?
Well, I think that it's an appropriate question, and I think we're looking at a lot of that, a lot of all of that. I think
Right.
I think that there's a strong likelihood, given the case history, if you really look with a broad, a broad outlook. If you look at case history, if you look at old like humanoid case history, if you look at the work of Timothy Good, if you look at the work of people like the Native American historian and writer R.D. Six-Keller Clark, for example,
Yep.
in her cataloging of Native American and First Nations case history, there's a lot there. I'm just looking at the bookshelf right next to me, you know what I mean? But there's so much like in here in terms of like Coral Lorenzen, Coral and Gemma Lorenzen that ran APRO. They had so many humanoid cases, Timothy Good, that really kind of looked a lot like extraterrestrials. They looked a lot like humanoids coming out of like weird capsule ships that kind of seemed like they could have been a cross between, that seemed more like submarines in a lot of ways. They seemed like these pressurized devices that are a little bit less like our airplanes and a little bit more like our submersibles when it comes down to it.
Right.
And that's interesting, right? Because and a lot of those cases, a lot of those earlier cases, there'd be interactions, and there are kind of like a few different buckets for like what those beings tended to look like. And a lot of times they didn't look like the Greys. A lot of times, like in the early work of the Lorenzens and like some of the stuff that Donald Kehoe would talk about, and folks like John Keel back in the day, right? A lot of those would be like shorter humanoid beings that would like be in kind of like a weird unitard, like kind of flight suit kind of thing.
Right.
Some of them would have kind of like quasi Asiatic features, or some of them would have like kind of a darker skin, and they'd often be compared to like Italians, like short Italian looking individuals, right? And we just kind of gloss over a lot of those cases because they're too weird, right? It's like, well, but then like the Greys took over, so we don't have to think about those weird space Italians because like there's all this other stuff, right? But when we look at the case history and we look at those old cases, it's like, okay, so there are a few things that are possible. There's one school of thought where it's like, oh, they can appear however they want to us, and so they probably do, right? And there's certainly something to be said for that. I do think that there are certain forms of NHI that seem very, very capable at hacking our perception, and can appear and do appear however they'd like to people, to make them more scared, feel more safe, whatever the case may be, to like kind of take advantage of the situation in a way that can kind of work with our feelings and our perceptions in the way that's most advantageous. And, but then there are some of these other cases where it doesn't seem like if you're trying to go for something safe, or even if you're trying to do something to freak people out, that there'd be like hundreds of cases of weird, short, like kind of darker skinned, darker haired individuals back in like the early or the 40s and the 50s, that these people might have never met each other at all and would have no reason to.
Right.
And it'd be like, oh yeah, they'll be fine with this. Like, this is fine. Like, just kind of like,
Right.
Space Italians. That's fine.
Right, Space Italians.
So, and then, but people report other stuff. People report, mantid looking beings, and the short grays, the tall grays. You have reptilian cases. There was a long period of time where I didn't think that there was anything to reptilian cases, and like I still don't know what to think about reptilian cases. And then there's also, once you really look at the case history of reptilians in a large format, and you look at all of the different places, including like through the kind of para-anthropological record, in terms of like other cultures that have reported beings like this, that were like subterranean or seemingly coming from out of the water and things like this. There do seem to be like a few buckets of things that seem like they're kind of reptilians, and like I don't know what to do with that. But like, and the interesting thing about that is that most of those cases, most of them seem to be based in the same specific areas. So there are like Vietnamese cases, like there are a really interesting group of cases of reptilians, like during the Vietnam War, and like Vietnam vets like seeing reptilians over there. There's also like a group of cases, and like I don't even want to mention where exactly, because I think that on a private level it's very interesting that it's so hyper located. But in essentially arid regions, these certain arid regions. And are those beings, because of the hyper locality to it, it would lead me to think that there's like a crypto-terrestrial element to that, where they might be they might live like in a more terrestrial way, in a hidden way that's actually just kind of beneath us or like adjacent to us somehow.
Right.
And like I never thought that I never thought that for a long time, I thought that was just like, that was too wacky, that was too far. And kind of the more, it partially is like through absorbing the work of folks like RD6 Killer Clark that I'm like, no, it does seem like there's something to it. So that being said, like there's also the aspect where a lot of people that have experiences and have communication during meditation, right?
Right.
And this is something that I've experienced a lot in the experiencer group, is that if people often have something that sets them off. They have an experience and then they have more experiences after that, right? And often their first experiences as a child or an adolescence. And I don't know why, but it seems that if somebody had an experience during childhood or adolescence, that, maybe it's because their brain, instead of hitting the recycle button, they were like, this is just reality. You're still learning about reality as a kid. You're experiencing things for the first time. This thing happens, and then your mind's like, well, I guess that happens. Whereas I think that sometimes when people have an odd experience later on, I've seen this plenty of times as adults, they'll be like, I just uncovered this memory, and like, I don't know how I forgot it because like, it was so strange. And then other people say like, oh, well, you forgot it because like our brains are like sense making machines. And if something really freaky happens, like it wants to forget it because it wants to create order. I don't know if that's like totally true or not, but there seems to be something to it. Anyway, as an aside, I'm saying that like a lot of people that haven't had experiences up through adulthood, if they haven't up until that point, it's often the case, I find in like maybe north of 30% of the cases, 40% of cases, it'll be somebody in meditation that feels like they were visited or they heard a voice and they knew that it was not their voice, their inner voice. They knew that it was not them. And it was something like finding that the meditator was receptive. And this isn't like new woo stuff. Like there's a lot of going through Vajrayana Buddhism and like kind of like older subsets of Buddhism. There are strategies for ignoring or acknowledging non-human intelligence or like other kinds of beings, spiritual beings, however like the framing was at various points in history, for what could be kind of knocking at the door during meditation. So, the more that we explore these things, we recognize that form of non-human intelligence, if we're going to think about it that way, has a much longer history and seems to be able to approach us at a much greater distance, if distance even exists with these kinds of beings, right?
Right.
So in that respect, I think that it's very, very possible that we are dealing with something that's could be considered interdimensional or ultraterrestrial, that's able to communicate with us at a distance, much as some of us that are more kind of talented in the psi phenomena can do stuff like remote viewing, right?
Right.
So so what we see here, there seem to be visiting beings that seem to be studying us. They'll even tell us like they're essentially coming here to like catalog. They'll be doing like, we have so many cases of beings doing like soil samples, taking samples of flora, fauna, things like that, right? And asking people questions. That happens less frequently now than it seemed to in the past. But interestingly, there's still these forms of communication happen. So I do think that there's ultra-terrestrial. I think that there's a large possibility of crypto-terrestrial behaviors, that there could be something like localized bases within or adjacent to Earth, as wild as that sounds. So extraterrestrials, crypto-terrestrials, ultra-terrestrials, and interdimensionals. I think that we have a lot of anecdotal evidence that supports all of those concepts, and I think all of those are probably on the table.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, those are all really good points. And I think when you look at those types of things and you start thinking about disclosure and kind of the impact that these types of things could have on that, President Trump has made that, order to release the UFO files. Whether we'll get it or not, probably not the full thing is my thought on that. But what I'm thinking as far as this, and this is my thoughts, and I would love to hear your thoughts on it. Disclosure. I think, and this is from somebody who is, in this ufology field, this is like kind of an unpopular opinion probably. So I'm going to say that, but people think about like, can humanity handle disclosure? Like if the president were to come forward and say, yes, we're being, we're interacting with this non-human intelligence, can humanity handle that thought? And I think some people can, but the maybe unpopular thought is I think a lot of people can't. And I'm not saying I don't want disclosure. I 100% want disclosure. But I think that even for people who believe in aliens and extraterrestrials or whatever they are, I think that even if they believe in it, there's a difference in believing that we're being contacted and knowing we're being contacted. I think that's kind of two different like mind frames. And I feel like if and when hopefully disclosure happens, I think a lot of people who think they're going to be okay with it are going to turn out that they're not. Like it's really going to impact them. It's going to shake them to their core, even though they kind of believed it to begin with. And then you have people obviously who never believed it, and it's going to really, really impact those people. What are your thoughts on that? Do you think that given, potentially that there's ultra-terrestrials, there's a non-human intelligence living right in our water, right here on our planet. Do you think people are going to handle that well?
I'm very curious. I tend to view it a lot like you do, or it sounds like anyway. I believe that it's going to be very challenging information for some people. It's interesting that, Trump made that statement, and we'll see how much follow through there is with that now that this kind of war in Iran has started, and there's already the war in Ukraine. There's already the war in Israel. It's like there's a lot of wars going on. It's like,
yeah,
how, and people are starting to, it's just now we're just kind of in the first week of this new one where it's like, okay, how many countries need to be involved before we start calling it a world war, right?
Right.
Because,
exactly.
As of today, we have like some reports that are a little bit contested about whether Germany and or France are going to get involved with the Iran war. It's like, once that starts happening, if that starts happening, that has a lot more World War vibes than it has regional conflict vibes, right?
Yeah.
So I'm cautiously optimistic that there's going to be more disclosure news happening. If nothing else, just to distract people from other things,
Right.
as many people have speculated. And at the same time, I'm like, hey man, like if we get our disclosure, that's great too. I do think that I tend to agree a little bit with Jacques Vallée, for example, who's kind of very famously stated for years, and he still does in private, like up, left, and center, that that disclosure is going to happen in as little as humanly, like if it's coming from kind of the US government, if it's coming from the military and the intelligence communities, they're not incentivized to actually be transparent about things. Like that's not what intelligence, like they accrue specialized information specifically so that they can use it for leverage. Like that's what the intelligence community is. Like, right? Like that's what the whole thing is. So it doesn't really make sense for them to just be like, well, here's a round on the house, right? Like, and the military is very similarly, disincentivized from doing that. So I tend to agree with Vallée and others that say like it'll probably be as little as humanly possible, and it'll probably be as skewed as to be advantageous in a certain way. Now, whether that's to scare people, whether that's to confuse people, whether that's this or that, like I can't really say. And like as opposed to some other people, like I try to resist like predicting the future too much,
Right.
I think that it's responsible to try to be as pragmatic and as grounded as possible when thinking about this stuff moving forward. But looking at it from a strategic perspective, I would tend to agree with Jacques. And given that he himself has had security clearances since like the late 50s, and he has been one of the more transparent or one of the more open people within that whole framework through like publishing his diaries and many other things. It doesn't mean that I necessarily trust everything that Jacques says, but like I think that there's accuracy when he says that statement. So given that, like, yeah, I think a lot of people are going to be confused. I think a lot of people are going to be scared and shocked. And at the same time, it's so wild that it's happening this year, because it seems like 2026 is really the year of people having like fear and like just breaking their brains open. And it's like the year that everybody's joking about it, like, oh, it's the year that all the conspiracy theories turned out to be true, and it's like except for flat earth, and like right and there does seem to be something to that, and there does seem to be this kind of singularity approaching. And and some people speculate like maybe they have to get some disclosure out because the AI is going to figure it out anyway, right? Situations like that. So I do hope that more comes out through citizens groups, through independent startups that are truly not connected to the defense industry. I think that kind of people talk about catastrophic disclosure, and well, Carl Nell talks about catastrophic disclosure, and then other people speculate about what that is. And, you know, in his estimation, I was there when he originally rolled out the phrase catastrophic disclosure at the first Soul Foundation conference. And he put up that slide that they didn't allow to be published for a bunch of months. And in that, his conception of it was like if another government disclosed, or if the phenomenon itself disclosed, right? And then other people have taken that to mean, what if we just like throw everything out there,
Right.
and what if it's just a mess, and all these other things. And on the one hand, I think that there should be more of that. I don't think that I think that the way for people to understand that there's a reality to this, it needs to come out through more than one voice. It needs to come out not just through Trump. It can't come out just through Biden. It can't come out just through Trump. It can't come out just through one of the Clintons or
Right.
the Obamas or whatever. Because
Right.
like if it was any of them, like only like maybe 30-40% of people would buy it anyway, right?
Right.
And so there really has to be like a wider group of scientists and academics and experiencers from around the world talking about it, and just kind of owning up to being like, yeah, this stuff happens, because it does, right? So I'm hopeful, and it's weird because it's like, if it could happen in any year, I guess it's this year, because we're just like, this is the year of everybody's like brains being broken open, and the wildest stuff coming out, seemingly. Does that make sense?
Man. Yeah, it definitely does. Definitely does. So hopefully we'll get some disclosure this year, at least make some more progress towards it.
Yes,
Jay, I don't want to take
absolutely.
too much of your time, but I want to say thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me. I'll put your links to your what's it called, the experiencer group. If you want to send me the link to that, I can put that in there, because if there's people who watch and
Absolutely,
there are also experiences, I'd love to put them in connection with you on that.
Cool.
Is there any other accounts that you want to plug, or any shows or anything else you want to plug?
Yeah, well, I mean, just Cosmosis, UFOs and NHI reality. If you haven't seen it, it's free on Tubi, it's free on Amazon Prime, and you can still find it on Apple TV. I think it's on a couple other services like Roku, Zumo or something like that, and like a few of these others. But check it out, and I look forward to hearing what folks think down in the comments later on. It's absolutely wonderful to meet you. It's great to be here today, and to be able to hang out. Thanks so much for having me on the show. It means a lot to me. It's cool, man.
Of course, Jay. Anytime, man. You're an awesome guy, and you're doing some fantastic work. So keep it up.
Thanks, man. Appreciate it.
All right. Thank you, Jay. Take care.
Thank you. Thanks, Scott.